Hey everyone, welcome to Tech Attitude. So my first camera and my first camera review on the channel. Let's get it started. It's been 2 months now that I've been using the Sony A6400 mirrorless camera. I've used it mostly for my YouTube videos or some of my casual indoor-outdoor photo shoots. Now, I've used Canon's camera for my entire life of my friends and my family relatives, and I was really gotten used to all the Canon's user interface, its aesthetic grip, all the pros and cons with the Canon. But switching on from Canon to Sony, I was really going on with my gut feeling on this camera, and to be honest, it turned out to be really good. On YouTube you'll get a lot of reviews about the Sony A6400. Now most of these reviews are comparing the A6400 with its predecessor, the A6300, or the next upper variant of the A6400, that's the Sony A6500. But in this video I'm not going to compare it with its other siblings. But what I'm going to tell you my honest reviews and my honest thoughts about the A6400 and how I feel about it after using it for 2 months. The design of this camera has really impressed me. In fact, it's one of the reasons why I chose the Sony A6400 over other cameras. It's really compact and it's really lightweight. It can go head to head with any point and shoot camera if you take out the big heavy 18 to 35 mm lens. I mean, the lens is just more heavier than the body of this camera and it makes it a little bit unbalanced, but anyway, you just have to hold the camera with 2 hands, so that helps. My only concern here is my 3 fingers just easily slide onto the grip of this camera, but my pinky finger has nothing to grab onto, so it's just left there hanging. Other than that, the button layout is really good. The shutter button, the navigation or the aperture buttons are really well placed, and you don't have to look after to cross check if you are pressing any wrong button on the camera. Bonus, the buttons are really tactile and you get a really premium finish on the premium feel from the buttons of this camera. The flip up screen is really good as well. I've tried it in broad sunlight and it's easily visible to naked eyes. Yes, it's troublesome for all the vloggers out there as the hot shoe mount is right in front of the screen and it blocks the view of the screen if you're vlogging or if you're going to attach some kind of accessory in the front or on the hot shoe of this camera. But for me it really works well. There's also a new feature where you can flip out the screen completely and the camera will engage to a self-timer mode. Coming on to the software, and it took me almost 2 to 3 hours to understand all of the Sony's user interface and to understand what's placed where in the Sony's settings. And after that it took me an almost hour to understand all of the shortcuts on this camera. And to be honest, it's really simple to understand all the Sony's user interface if you are a noob like me who is jumping right onto the DSLR camera. But in terms of convenience, the Sony user interface is really terrible. Even if you want to change a simple setting like the white balance of the camera, you have to go through all the 14 pages of the camera setting. There's also 14 pages for all the video settings of this camera and all the 14 pages of image settings in this camera. So it's really terrible that you have to go all the way the long route to change a simple setting like a white balance on this camera. The lack of the touchscreen does feel a little bit, even though the touchscreen is capable of accepting all the touch, but the touch feature only works in certain areas of the camera viewfinder. When you want to focus the camera, you can just tap onto the screen, but you can't use this touchscreen in any other Sony's user interface. You can't navigate through all the settings with the use of touchscreen. I don't know what's this all about. I mean, the device is capable in terms of hardware, but the software is not capable of using all the hardware. I mean, come on Sony, you can do better than this. So for the feature set, it holds up really well. The fast tracking autofocus is really well and quick at the same time. The real-time eye focus also holds up the target and it doesn't let it go easily. I'm really impressed with the feature set of this camera. Now speaking about the most important component of this camera, the sensor. Now it's an APS-C sensor, which is the biggest one when compared to all the Canons and all the Nikon's APS-C sensor. The sensor is a 24.2 megapixels and it can shoot a 4K video at 30 frames per second and a 1080p video for up to 120 frames per second. Now 4K 60 is not available in this camera and I'm not complaining. I just don't want 4K 60 FPS right now. Speaking of videos, and this camera has a rolling shutter problem. Well, this is where you get a jelly-like feel to all your videos when you pan the camera really fast. Well, every mirrorless camera has this problem. Even your mobile phone camera has this problem. Well, when you record an high-speed thing or when you pan the camera really fast, the image just get distorted and you get this jelly-like feel. This is not a big concern for me because for the most of the time I'm sitting right here and speaking to you guys with the help of this camera. So there's no fast or high-speed movements while shooting this video. But for any of the vloggers, well, they have to hold this camera right in front of them and they have to keep walking and talking at the same time. This might be the big concern for them because then this camera is just not for you. The camera can go on and record a 4K footage for an hour and above without any problems. The heat dissipation or the heat management of this camera is really good. Bonus, there's no record limit for recording all of your 4K footage. But what holds it back is its battery. Now the battery drains out from 100% to 0% within an 1.5 hour of 4K recording. With that, in 2020, this camera has a micro USB port for charging, which really sucks because USB Type-C is all in and this camera doesn't have that. You have a micro HDMI port and a microphone input port. Now some people complain that this camera does not have a headphone jack for those serious video recorders. To them, I mean, come on, this is not your professional full frame camera which has all the bells and whistles. This camera is more of a mid-ranger for someone who just wants to start his YouTube channel or for someone who just is enthusiastic enough to go with a high or a mid-range camera. Then this camera is just for you. Speaking about image quality, and it's really excellent. You'll get great results with this camera and this camera will not let you down in any scenario. Now I've been using the Sony's E-mount lens, which has a variable focal length of 18 to 135 mm and a variable aperture of 3.5 to 5.6. But even with a small aperture of 3.5, this camera does perform really well in low light condition. Of course, I do recommend an f1.6 or an f1.8 aperture lens over this camera for the best performance in low light conditions. But even with this small aperture of f3.5, it does perform really well. For the normal or advanced professional user, the image quality does keep up with the name and you can totally rely on the camera's performance. The images are real sharp, the colors pop out real well. I have to say, I'm really impressed with this camera's performance. Now on to the conclusion. See, this thing is also missing an additional SD card slot. It does not have a headphone jack, there's the rolling shutter problem and the terrible battery backup. Now, if you compare this cons with any other mid-range camera, then there are also the same cons as well. You don't get all the bells and whistles on this camera. Maybe you should check out the more professional cameras for that, like the recently launched Sony A7S Mark III. That thing has what, 4 SD card slots. It's a complete package with that. But if you're someone who is really enthusiastic, who wants to jump into the rally of DSLRs, then I highly recommend this camera and even the Sony's A6100. It's also a good package with the same sensor. That's all with the Sony A6400, my first DSLR camera and my first review about a camera on this channel. Obviously, there's the Sony A6500 as well, which has all those upgrades over the A6400. But there's also the A6600, which has all the upgrades over the A6500. What I'm saying is, if you're willing to spend all those money, you'll get the best of the best out there. But in terms of the budget of 70,000 rupees, you get the biggest sensor, the biggest APS-C sensor in the competition, and that mirrorless technology as well. So within this competition of APS-C sensor, the A6400 really beats all of them. Alright, nothing much happening in the tech industry right now, so might as well finish with the review of A6400. But there's a rain of smartphones coming our way, starting from the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 series, the next iPhone and the Pixel phones. So a lot of things to cover in the future. So if you're new here, then subscribe to the channel. That's all for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.